Hello, fellow citizens! I am your host, Jess, and this is your reminder that the weight of the entire world is not on your shoulders, and you can make a difference. This podcast is about what it means to be a citizen and neighbor where you live. For me, that's Philadelphia. There are lots of ways to be a citizen and a neighbor, and I want to cover all of them in this podcast, starting with the belief that citizens should be informed. Because of our current nationwide agenda, I'm kicking off the podcast by examining the candidates and roles on the 2020 general election ballot. Today, I'm joined by my good friend who I grew up with in South Plainfield, New Jersey, and we graduated from high school together all the way back in 2007, and we're still in touch while she's on the other coast. Gauri, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yay! I'm really glad that you said yes, because some people are really not sure about it, but I know you're ready.
I'm ready, and even if I'm not ready, I feel like just talking about it is a way to prepare yourself anyway, so.
Yeah, I think so too. That's like kind of the conversation Sarah and I were having with the questions on her ballot, because we were still like, I don't really know what's going on here.
Exactly.
Speaking of hometown friends, you're a Jersey girl, but you live out on the West Coast. How'd you get over there?
So after I got my bachelor's at Rutgers, I knew I wanted to pursue a graduate degree in public health. And at that time, my sister was living in California, so I had been visiting her quite often, and I just fell in love with California. So after living in the same place all my life, I was kind of ready to get outside my comfort zone, and that just felt like the right time to kind of like take that leap and just go for it. So I haven't looked back since, but Jersey will always have a place in my heart, and I always try to visit whenever I can. So I am a Jersey girl at heart still.
Oh, I love that. What do you think, what in particular do you think stood out about California?
Definitely, I remember the moment where I knew I was going to go to California was when I was digging my car out of the snow after the 8th blizzard of my senior year at college. And I was like, I need to live somewhere where I never have to do this again.
Yeah.
So that was like the biggest selling point, was the weather.
Speaking of college, what was your college experience?
It was good. I feel like since I was so close to home, it didn't really feel like a traditional kind of experience where you're on your own for the first time. So I always had that comfort of always being really close to home and having a car and just being able to drive back to my house anytime I felt lonely. Mm-hmm. So that was like another reason that I wanted to go really far away, because I would have to force myself to like get to know my community and get to know people and making friends and making relationships. So I think that was really good for me in a way to grow up.
You kind of like pushed yourself out of the nest.
Yeah. My parents didn't push me out. I pushed myself out.
Sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
So how long have you been in California?
I've been here for 8 years now, a little over 8 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And your 20s are like that time when you're figuring it all out.
Exactly. So yeah, when I moved to California, I was like in my early 20s and just about to start grad school. And now I'm in my early 30s and about to get married. So definitely like a huge, huge change and transition in life. So I feel like even though I grew up in Jersey, a lot of my growing up was also in California.
Yeah. So speaking about getting married, are you spending all your time like planning the wedding right now?
So we planned a lot of it early on because we didn't know what the situation was going to be like with COVID and all the cancellations and stuff. So we just like booked all the big stuff already and made sure that our vendors are kind of flexible if we need to postpone anything.
Nice.
So the stressful part is over. Now it's just kind of waiting to see when we're actually able to have a wedding. So there's not much we can do about that except just wait.
Yeah, that's kind of nice to be in that waiting period.
Yeah, there's nothing else going on.
So, yeah, since the wedding planning is done, how do you spend your time these days?
Well, I really have been focusing on writing a lot more this year. I've kind of dipped my toes into freelance writing.
Mhm.
So, especially the timing was kind of crazy with COVID starting pretty early in the year, and I was starting my health writing journey. That happened to coincide. So, I've been writing a lot about COVID and writing in like kind of a personal health blog as well. But yeah, my background is in public health, and I was working in research before that, but I've been kind of just pursuing freelance writing and adding a more of a personal touch to my writing instead of
Yeah.
really heavy academic research stuff, which I think can be kind of boring sometimes.
Yeah, it's nice to have that personal connection.
Yeah, for sure.
So, how long would you say you've been voting?
I started voting. My first time voting was for the 2008 election with Obama. Um, I was registered to, and I was eligible to vote for the primary
Hmm.
before that general election, but I was not very civically engaged back then. And I
Yeah.
was like, I don't really care. I didn't really pay attention. I didn't really know what a primary was.
Hmm.
Um, None of like, I don't remember learning about all that stuff, even in school. If I did, I didn't absorb it. So it kind of just felt like, that's a waste of time. I'll just vote in the general election.
Yeah, I think that's like a common thought for people. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
the presidential one is the quote unquote important one.
Right. Like that's the only one people really talk about, but
Oh,
not
no.
true.
No. So, yeah, do you think that now you're informed?
I'm definitely more informed than I was when I first started voting. But in terms of like local stuff, I feel like there's still a lot for me to learn. I've been living in this district for maybe 3 years now,
Hmm.
but I would say up until this summer, I didn't really pay attention to like city council members or even the mayor of the city that I was living in. So like a lot of the social justice protests and movements earlier this summer kind of motivated me to just look into what are my district representatives all about, like where do they
Hmm.
stand on these issues. And I reached out to the mayor and I was trying to understand like where they lie in terms of their policing and like training for the police and all that stuff. So in school, and I'm guessing this was true for you too, because we went to the same school, but I don't really remember like being taught or being engaged in like local politics that much. Like
No.
we were never really encouraged to like go to a city council meeting or like
Right.
understand what even happens at a city council meeting.
Yeah, and nobody came to us either.
Yeah, nobody came to us. No one told us to go anywhere. So it's kind of like you get into your late teens, early 20s, and you're just like, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just becomes like on you to figure it out, which
Hmm.
kind of unfortunate because I wish that it was more embedded into like our educational system to kind of
Yeah.
understand that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm more aware now.
I feel like we didn't really understand the whole mission behind a history class or a social
Hmm.
studies class until now that I'm doing my own history catch
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
And I think it's also what I'm realizing is, you do have to go search for that local news because there's not as much of an audience. Like, I
Hmm.
started this podcast kind of focusing on PA because everything is obviously like different state to state, and that's a lot to cover, but I'm also trying not to like put too much focus on PA, which is why it's great that like Sarah agreed and you agreed to talk to
Hmm.
me to reach more people because I want people to understand that there are people out there with the information, and I hope that people are finding where that information is and getting excited to look for it. Because, like, it's easier to find national news, of course, because
Right.
we have national news channels or like
Mhm.
websites or whatever you want to call it. because there's a bigger audience for that
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to like media as a business, whereas this is like,
Exactly.
let's just reach my neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like local and community politics is like the underdog in terms of how we talk and how we think about politics and how important it is. So
Yeah,
hopefully people with this election will give more heed to their local issues as
I hope
well.
so, because I thought that's what was going to happen after 2016. And
Yeah.
I mean, maybe for a lot of people, it did kick them in the butt. I thought I was going to be one of those people,
Mm-hmm.
and it really fell to the wayside because I had a
Yeah.
full-time job.
Right.
And then I went freelance, and I still like didn't think about it because then the presidential election was over, and I still voted in a couple
Right.
elections after that for judges, I remember. And I know I looked up their campaign page like the day that I was going to vote. So I was like, well, I want to try, but it
Yeah.
was the
Let's
day
just cram
of.
this in. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not really the same. I mean, so
Yeah.
speaking about like, studying the day of, like how much time have you put in, at least so far, cuz you don't have a ballot yet, like you haven't voted
Yeah.
yet, into researching your ballot?
Um, well, just researching two out of the 12 propositions took me like a full 2 days.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so there's 12 propositions, and then we have some other candidates that are going to be running. So it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot of messaging about make sure you vote, but I wish people would also remember like there's a lot that we're voting on. So
Mhm.
not only make sure you vote, but make sure you read up on what you need to vote on and
Yeah.
be really informed before you make your decision.
Yeah, that's as soon as I got my ballot and I told people I got it, they were like, "So did you hand it in? Did you hand it in?"
Yeah,
And I'm like, "No, because
I
I'm
just
not
got it.
done. Like I
Yeah.
want to do my research and I want to make sure I'm not rushing it." And so I agree. I think they need to like remarket or fix the language. It's not just
Hmm.
go vote, it's be educated.
Yeah,
So
be educated.
that's what we're here to do today.
Yay, hopefully.
Oh, so you said that in addition to two of the propositions, you want to talk about one of your like candidates that you're really standing behind, and
Yeah.
then to be sort of equal across the board, a bit
Hmm.
more educated. We're also going to talk about the incumbent. So we're going to kick it off with the California State Assembly District 20 candidates. We talked about the general election previously,
Hmm.
which now I'm realizing I don't have my little blurb up. But if you think about, this is like the cheesy way that I remember it, is that if you remember Schoolhouse Rocks, and
Oh
how they
yeah.
had their little song about the bill waiting
Yeah.
to be signed and he was on Capitol Hill, that refers to Congress and the U.S. House of Representatives and the
Mhm.
Senate, whereas the General Assembly is just the state level of that. So it's
Yeah.
still a lot of bills. It's
Yes.
a lot of committees. Oh my
A lot.
goodness.
It's a lot.
Which thank goodness, I guess, that it's split up like that.
Right. Because that would be a lot to tackle all at once for one person.
Yeah, I was like reading up on the way they describe the issues for these candidates, and I feel actually like the candidates on your ballots, the ones we're going to talk about today, their campaign pages mentioned so many more issues than the ones I've
Yeah.
been seeing for Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
which I guess, I mean, it's also like a much larger state.
That's true.
And your world is just so different over there.
Yeah. We're like a different planet.
It really is. So, which candidate do you want to start with?
We can start with the incumbent. That's probably easier.
All right. So, since you have done more of the research, I'm going to read the basic information
Okay.
and then I'll toss it to you. So,
Sounds good.
to kick it off, we're talking about the incumbent for District 20's State Assembly, Bill Quirk, which I think that's an interesting last name.
Yeah.
He has been representing District 20 since December of 2012. Quirk earned his Bachelor's of Science in Engineering and Applied Physics from Columbia in 1967 and his PhD in Astrophysics from Columbia in 1970. He worked as a climate change scientist at NASA before beginning his career at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, where he played a key role in the negotiations for the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Teaching physics at Columbia, Caltech, and UC Davis helped Quirk formulate his lifelong interest in education. Quirk has served as a leader for more than 30 years in many local organizations, including the local PTA, Hayward Rotary, the Friends of the Library, the Hayward Library Commission, the Board of Communications Workers of America, Local 9119, and the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. In 2004, Quirk won a seat on the Hayward City Council. While on the City Council, he brought the same in-depth analytical perspective to city decisions that he developed as a scientist. He worked with his colleagues to prioritize neighborhood safety, revitalize downtown by attracting a movie theater, improve traffic in the Mission Foothill Corridor, and create more jobs in housing around South Hayward BART. Assemblymember Quirk and his wife Laurel moved to the Hayward area in 1978 and have been married for 41 years. They raised 2 children who attended California public schools and the UC system. And a lot of that information is from billtrack50.com, where you can see the different bills that the Assembly has sponsored, as well as who has voted on what. Mm-hmm. Whoa, that's a lot of information.
That was a lot.
So what else can you tell us?
Yeah, so, you mentioned that he has been in this seat since 2012. And when I was looking into him, I realized that he's pretty much ran unopposed since 2012.
Oh.
So, this district is very heavy Democrat. So it's pretty safe to say that a Democrat will always win. Mm-hmm. So whenever he's ran against a Republican, he's gotten like 99% of the votes.
Wow.
But since 2012, I think this is the first election where he's running against another Democrat in the general election for this seat. So that was really interesting to me, just to see like a fresh new face. Mm-hmm. Because I remember voting for him in the last election, 2018, but no one else was running against him. So I didn't really think twice.
Right.
But this time kind of made me do a little more research and see like, what is he really about? So yeah, I'll just go over like what kind of stood out when I was doing some research about him. So his top 3 priorities are reducing California's greenhouse gas footprint in a way that strengthens the economy, addressing housing and homelessness by increasing home building, and increasing funding for educational outcomes. And then on, I think it was the vote 411, there were some questions that they had the candidates answer. So I'll try to hit those too. The first question they asked them was to reach a goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. What proposals or legislation would you support? Please be specific. So his background as a physicist, his answer really spoke to that, because he talks a lot about the use of hydrogen and how that is a much more cost-effective alternative than carbon, which I thought was interesting. So he talks about like heating and cooling and using hydrogen storage and all this thing. He gets very like technical about it.
Yeah.
And I had trouble kind of like absorbing everything that he was saying.
I read that and I was like, wow, this is a lot. And especially you look at it next to the opponent and he's like a quarter of the size. Yeah. But I think it also speaks to the fact that this is somebody who's been in this position as well. So they know how things work.
Yeah. So like I really appreciated his thoroughness. Like he obviously, knows what he's talking about. So that's always a good thing. And, his background as a scientist is very obvious in his answers. Mm-hmm. I do wish that he had answered that beyond the scope of just hydrogen stations.
Yeah.
I wish he went into more specifics about like what kind of legislation he would introduce to allow social systems to make for a more carbon neutral state. Like, for example, like improving public transit and like making it easier to get around without cars, things like that. But, you know, the answer was obviously very scientific and very accurate as far as I could see. But I do wish that he spoke more about the social side of it. I'll move on to the next question that he answered. So this one was about his take on affordable housing. So of course, California has a huge housing crisis. We're one of the most expensive regions in the country to rent, to own a home. So this question was asking what kind of proposals he would support to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing for all income groups in California. And he says we have to build more housing, first and foremost. And he talks about enforcing regional housing needs allocation, or HNA, and having each city and unincorporated area required to zone for housing of all types. He also talks about working with legislation to make low interest loans available to finance the builders to build more developments, talking about reducing fees for cities to build more developments, supporting a housing bond to have more money for affordable housing. I feel like a lot of his emphasis was on like the physical act of building more housing.
Right.
But I don't know specifically what more he has in mind. So like, with more housing, how much more of that will be affordable housing, and how much of that will also include tenants having accessibility to more housing? And I kind of wish he touched more on the actual homelessness problem too, because it sounds like the way he answered it was just about, we just don't have enough houses, but it's not like it exists in a vacuum, you know, like we have people that are homeless, and that is like a huge root issue of why we need more housing. Right. I kind of wish that he touched on that part too.
I like this. I like hearing what you want more out of it. That's so great.
Yeah, I'm realizing like I never questioned this before because he's ran unopposed. So now I'm just like, well, your opponent mentioned this, so what's your take on that? So I kind of, you know, I like being able to ask those questions. And then finally, the last question that they go over is water needs for Californians. So what legislation would he support to meet water needs? He gave a very thorough answer for this. I won't read the whole thing, but basically he said, you know, as of 2019, over 1 million Californians did not have access to clean drinking water. I did not know that.
Wow.
That's insane. He said he shepherded a bill through the committee that he chairs to assure that small water districts in the state will have the money needed to operate their facilities so that customers have water that meets health standards. He also talked about helping pass bills to test water for lead in schools.
Oh my gosh.
And then he also talked about putting bonds on the ballot to support storage of water for drought years.
Yeah.
Which I think is so important, especially now that we're seeing how severe fire seasons have started getting in California.
Oh my gosh.
They have just been getting worse and worse the last few years, and just starting earlier and earlier. Typically, they're supposed to start, I guess, around September, October, and then like November to March is supposed to be the rainy season, but it hasn't really been following that pattern.
Yeah, I mean, it's nature. It doesn't follow a schedule.
Yeah, it doesn't follow a schedule. And with all the climate change and stuff, it's even more going to be not following a schedule. So I think it's really great that he mentioned the storage of water for drought years. I think out of all the questions, I appreciated his answer about water most. Yeah.
Wow. It's just so, you have to think of so many different things where you live.
I know. That's so like insane. That's the downside, I guess, of being in such a big state, is just there's so many different needs, and not everyone like needs the same things, but we want to find representatives that still, you know, represent all of us. So it's a lot. There's a lot to understand.
Oh my gosh. I think it's really great that now he's opposed, not because. So I think, like, what I mentioned in the first episode is I'm not trying to find, like, the good guy and the bad guy. It's just who represents you best. And so, like you said, there wasn't as much of a need to look into what Quirk was doing before, which isn't to say he was doing anything bad. It's just like, but now it's like, oh, right, what has he been doing? And can somebody do it better or differently? Which I'm really curious about this. Like, he's been in there for 8 years. And so the way I see it is like, he knows how it works. He knows kind of like the lingo to use, the attitude to have when you're in there, because things do take a long time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have to, I don't know if be patient is the right word, because you want to make sure things get done.
Right.
But so I guess my question or like concern is anytime that somebody comes in who's very fresh to this whole idea of government, is it maybe, I don't know if a step back is the right way to look at it, or does it maybe like slow some of that legislature down a bit, because those people might have to like play catch up, or they have to understand this new world that they're in, because you can get people who are running for the first time, joining General Assembly for the first time, and they're eager and they're excited, but maybe they don't realize how long it's going to take to get things done, and they might get frustrated with that, and then possibly like feel, you know, they need that constant push of motivation to remember, like, why am I here? And I have to, you know, I'm in a professional setting, so I have to present myself in a professional way. I don't know that I could do this. Like,
I definitely couldn't. I could say that with a lot of confidence, but I couldn't.
Like, I want to get involved, and I think it'd be nice to eventually get into like a smaller level of this. But I mean, bless their hearts for doing this.
I know. It's a lot. Not everyone is cut out for it. So I'm really glad that people are out there that are cut out for it and are pursuing it.
Yeah. So hopefully the opponent is ready for this.
Yeah, I hope so.
So now we're going to talk about Alexis Villalobos. He is raised in the Bay Area by a family of working class immigrants. He graduated from Hayward's public schools and became the first in his family to earn a college degree when he graduated from Occidental College in Los Angeles. His grandfather was a migrant farm worker who volunteered for the United Farm Workers, and his father was a union construction worker in San Francisco. Proud of this history, Alexis always had a special interest in the labor movement, and after college, Alexis moved back to the Bay Area to pursue a career in workers' rights and advocacy. As an organizer for SEIU Local 87, Alexis led a successful campaign to reinstate a group of wrongfully terminated janitors at the San Francisco Superior Courthouse, and he worked on the ongoing campaign to win a contract for janitors and Equinox's luxury gyms in San Francisco. Alexis has also worked as a paralegal at various workers' rights and civil rights law firms on cases involving the misclassification of gig workers, as well as gender, race, and disability discrimination. It's the new face. What do you think?
I am excited to see a new face. And I think especially since the 2018 midterms, when we got a lot of new fresh faces on a national level in Congress, including AOC, I think that really motivated people who maybe hadn't thought about going into politics, or maybe were on the fence but thought, how could someone like me possibly do that? And they saw like these new incoming people and thought, okay, maybe I can do that. So I think that's exciting. And I think it's exciting seeing just younger people wanting to be represented or wanting to represent their constituents, because it's nice to see someone who kind of reminds you of you.
Right.
being like on the big stage and making those decisions. So I'm interested to see, how this goes if he gets elected and how he will handle it. But yeah, let's get into what he's all about.
Okay.
So his top three priorities are securing a right to affordable housing for all, investing boldly in schools and communities, and strengthening labor laws and worker protections. So the first question is the same one that we got from Quirk. To reach a goal of carbon neutrality by 2045, what proposals or legislation would you support? So his answers are much shorter than Bill Quirk and a lot easier to understand, but also left me with a few questions too. So he says he wants to ban new and phase out old fossil fuel production and move to a 100% clean energy future while ensuring that workers in fossil industries receive new job training and deployment. He wants to produce hundreds of thousands of good jobs to build clean energy and transportation infrastructure, clean up pollution, improve resiliency, and prevent natural disasters. He also talks about putting taxes or increasing taxes on corporate emissions, expanding mandated testing of lead poisoning in children, and empowering working class communities to prevent neighboring sites from hosting new or expanded oil refineries, cement plants, and other toxic industries. So just overall, what stood out was how he off the bat was like 100% clean energy future. That is a very like bold and confident kind of statement to make. I do wish he kind of went more into specifics of how he would want that to happen, but seeing that is like the first priority on his list is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And I did really like that he also mentioned the workers in the fossil industries getting new job training, because I think that is a big criticism that a lot of people have and a big hesitation on wanting things like the Green New Deal or wanting to go completely clean energy. They're like, so many people have jobs in fossil fuel industries. Like, what will they do? They'll be out of a job. So I think it's great that he wants to emphasize making sure that those people are taken care of and have opportunity to be trained for these clean energy jobs. So I really appreciated that he mentioned that.
It makes sense. I mean, they have a skill set.
Exactly. So it's just kind of like, translating a skill set into a slightly different sector. But yeah, I think that's really important because you don't want to just leave those people to the side and be like, well, figure it out on your own. Yeah. So then the next question was about affordable housing. So he talks about universal rent control. He wants to repeal Costa-Hawkins, which restricts cities and local governments from passing stronger rent control standards. He talks about the right to legal counsel in any proceeding that can result in an eviction or foreclosure. So he wants to support legal aid for fair housing agencies that help people understand what their actual rights are when it comes to eviction and housing, because it can be kind of confusing and not many people just know that off the top of their heads, or they might not have access to a lawyer. So he talks about affordable housing throughout California by supporting housing nonprofits and community land trusts. He talks about the construction of new social housing in particular, by initiating statewide program to support social housing. He talks about the right of first refusal laws to grant tenants the right to buy or refuse to buy their home at a fair price before it's listed for sale on the market. So a lot of his answers around affordable housing, really what drew me was that he is talking a lot about like the supportive system in terms of the community, like community building. It's not just about, having more money to literally buy materials to build more houses. Like it has to go beyond that. So he talks about, having social housing, having housing for low income people, having housing, making sure people have, rent control. Like when more housing is available, what's going to stop the state or the government from just, hijacking the prices. Like just because there's more housing, there's still really high demand. So I was glad to see that he talked about rent control. I think that's a huge issue in the Bay Area. Bay Area rent is just out of this world. It's insane. And I feel like every election year we have people talking about what they're going to do to fix it and how it's going to happen, but it just doesn't really seem to go anywhere. So I don't know if we need a new person to get that done, or if we just need, more people like us voicing our opinions about it. But yeah, I was excited to see that he talked about rent control and affordable housing in particular.
I thought one of the interesting clips that I saw on his campaign page was where he went to a town hall meeting and just, responded to what had been said about debt and millennials and just cost of living. And I always feel like those are one of those resources to citizens that they don't really take advantage of, is like going to a town hall meeting, or at least like watching one. I'm on a like a neighborhood zoning committee email list, and they are right now are doing Zoom video chats, and if you want to just like pop in and see what's going on, it's just there. There's so many resources.
I know. I think, the problem is like people don't know about it, or it's just not,
or they just don't have the time.
There's no time, or
I think you brought up a really good point about his age, because he is a younger guy. Like, we're in our early 30s. It seems like that's where he is. And, mentioning AOC, she's a pretty young face. And I feel like there's this, because, we talk a lot about representation of both sexes and walks of life and like race, but I don't think we talk enough about age.
I agree.
And so I think, one of the reasons that AOC is such a big deal is not just what she stands for, but also like how visible she is to the public eye.
Right.
And so, like you said, with her and with Alexis Villalobos, like that looks like us. We're like, exactly. I'm young, and we want to be and stay educated in local politics. And so seeing somebody like that in local politics keeps you excited.
Yeah, and I think it's so much easier to engage when you have people that you feel like you can relate to or connect to in a certain way. And, I know AOC, I don't know if you follow any of her social media, but she really makes an effort to kind of go behind the scenes and really show like what is involved in Congress and like what her day-to-day kind of tasks look like as a congressperson. So just bringing that more to the forefront and being more transparent, I think that's something that also comes with people that are younger, not to be ageist or anything like that, but it definitely makes a difference. And especially because like our generation interacts so much through like social media and online. So when someone is in Congress who also interacts that way, that it makes it easier for you to stay connected and stay on top of like what's going on. So it doesn't even feel like you're doing homework. It's kind of just like, oh, I heard about this bill because I follow this, this politician on Twitter or whatever. So I totally agree with you. I think talking about age and representation is also important.
Yay! So what else does Alexis have to say to us?
Let's see. So another question mentions how we spend over $81,000 per individual who is incarcerated in California. So other than incarceration, what ways can the state address safety and justice? So Alexis says, I believe combating a racist criminal justice system means taking the steps toward abolition of the carceral state. I'm a strong proponent of defunding the police and reallocating those funds toward community resources that are proven to reduce crime, and investing in other models for seeking justice, such as restorative and transformative justice. So this answer was short and sweet. I do wish he fleshed it out a little more, but I'm really glad that he was very explicit in the way that he answered this.
Yeah.
In terms of, defunding the police has been such a huge talking point throughout the country. It's something that no matter where you stand on it as a politician in 2020, I don't think you can really ignore it. I think you kind of just have to address it no matter like how you feel about it. So I really appreciate his explicitness with this. And my one qualm is I wish that he kind of was a bit more specific in terms of what kind of community resources he wants to allocate those funds to.
Right.
On paper, I agree that, at least in California, or at least in this district, the police get more funding, and things like schools and other community resources, mental health stuff doesn't get as much funding.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that answer on paper, but I do wish that he had more examples of how he would do that or what that might look like in order to, address this.
Yeah, because it's always those broad statements that get you wondering, are you just saying this to like please the masses?
Right.
Or how much research have you put into this? Because it doesn't seem like if this is such a hot topic right now. So you would think that there would have been more details, but
I was really expecting to see a lot more like a fleshed out answer for this.
Yeah, step it up, Alexis. Come on.
Yeah, come on. What's that? And then closing off on Alexis, so back to legislation he would support to meet water needs of Californians. So he mentions repairing California's water supply infrastructure, investing in projects to improve the state's water supply problems. And this point stood out, supporting efforts to replace PG&E with a publicly owned power company or a customer-owned cooperative. So PG&E has, that's the main utility provider of Northern California, or the Bay Area specifically. PG&E has been so hotly contested in discussions about California politics, especially in terms of the really severe fire seasons that have happened in the last few years. So PG&E was sued by the state because they had outdated equipment that pretty much led to the Paradise Fire in 2018, which completely destroyed the whole town of Paradise and a lot of surrounding areas. So they have been in really hot water for a while now, and they have a monopoly on like utility and water and services. So I like that he talks about that, because I think that's a huge relevant issue right now. But I was like, I found myself asking more questions and being like, well, what would this look like? Or, how would you replace it? Or, what exactly does a customer-owned cooperative look like? I don't think I really know what he means by that. Or I have like a vague sense, but I would have liked to see more details. So yeah, on paper, a lot of interesting points. I do wish he went into more detail, but I'm hoping that if elected, he sticks to his word and, makes an effort to make these things happen.
I think what's interesting too, at least for our conversation, is when you do see certain words, you go to do your research. As somebody not in California, I didn't know about PG&E, and maybe somebody in California who's still like just learning would have to do that research. And so you make a really good point that if he would have added more information, then people would be more motivated to learn even more outside of just what they already know.
Right, yeah.
There's so much power in these answers.
There are. Words are powerful, y'all.
Yes! Oh, boy. Do you have any other words to say on these candidates?
Honestly, I'd be happy with either one of them. I think I've been living in this district for 3 years. I think Bill Quirk is, doing a fine job. But I think it's exciting when someone new enters the race, and that there's more of a possibility of a fresh face and someone who leans a little more progressive. I think that's interesting in terms of where our nation is headed. To see that up and down the ballot, that's pretty cool. But I'd be happy with either one. So just vote, guys. Just vote.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about 2 out of the 12 propositions on the California ballot. Oh my goodness.
I know.
So you want to talk about Proposition 16 and 22. Which one would you like to start with?
Let's just go in order, I guess. We can start with 16.
Okay. So I'm really excited to talk with you about these because I was very confused.
Yeah, it's confusing.
The verbiage that is on here, because we're looking at voterguide.sos.ca.gov. And I just feel like the way both arguments, pro and con, are written, it's almost like I'm questioning, like, wait, did the people who write this, like, did they both understand the proposition? Because the wording is so close that it got me confused.
Yeah.
Okay, starting with Proposition 16, it says, this is put on the ballot by the legislature. Proposition 16 allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. And the summary says that it would permit government decision-making policies to consider race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in order to address diversity by repealing constitutional provision prohibiting such policies. There's no fiscal effect on state and local entities. The effects of the measure depend on the future choices of state and local government entities and are highly uncertain. What? Because I read that and I'm like, okay, well, I always hear about, like, when you hire somebody, you can't say no to them because of their diversity.
Right.
And now it's this proposition, if passed, would say that you can do that.
So it's like a little more involved than that, but they don't really do a good job in terms of explaining it in a really easy to understand way. So some more background with this prop. With Prop 16, basically they are wanting to repeal Article 1, Section 31 of the California Constitution, which was added by Prop 209 in 1996. So Prop 209 prohibits state and local government from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to people based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. So before Prop 209 was approved in 1996, state and local policies referred to programs such as affirmative action, which was used to increase opportunities and representation for people who faced inequalities due to these circumstances like race, sex, color. So this proposal, Prop 16, if approved, would repeal Prop 209, and this would eliminate the ban on the consideration of race, sex, etc. in public education, public employment, and public contracting. So it sounds like it's very confusing, just the way that, like, off the bat. So I think it helped me a little more to read the actual arguments that they had. So I guess I'll start with the argument that they had in favor of Prop 16. So a yes on Prop 16 would mean equal opportunity for all Californians. They talk about living in the most diverse state in the nation, but white men are still overrepresented in positions of wealth and power in California. Today, nearly all public contracts and the jobs that go with them go to large companies run by older white men. White women make 80 cents on the dollar. The wage disparity is even worse for women of color and single moms. So as a result, an elite few are able to hoard wealth instead of investing it back into communities. Prop 16 opens up contracting opportunities for women and people of color. They also talk about how small businesses, are the backbone of the economy, yet Main Street businesses Main Street businesses owned by women and people of color lose over $1 billion in government contracts every year because of the current law. So they talk about needing to support these small businesses and making sure that wealth will be invested back into the communities. A thing that really stood out to me in this, though, so they talk about, supporting women of color that are disproportionately essential caregivers, especially during COVID-19. They talk about expanding access to good jobs, solid wages, regardless of gender, race. And they also mention the strong anti-discrimination laws will remain in effect. And then they say that quotas are still prohibited. So I thought that was interesting, but I kind of am confused as to how that's true.
Right.
I just am not sure how repealing this makes it so that quotas are not prohibited.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's being done for progressive reasons, and I totally understand, wanting to make sure that people that are disadvantaged get to be on a level playing field. I am wondering what kind of implications that this could cause, though, if you completely repeal that clause in the state constitution. So
that's why I'm confused. So when you say quotas, you mean like, okay, now to diversify, we are saying you have to have X amount of whatever, like women, people of color.
Right.
Because that's what my biggest, like, I guess, I don't know, confusion was, because they talk about how this is, I saw the wording here. Discrimination, and it says preferential treatment, which must refer to the quotas, right? In a sense of like, you feel like you're only being hired to meet that quota.
Right.
Okay. It's hard.
Yeah. This is why it took 2 whole days just to get through 2 of these. And I don't know if this is true, but it feels like they kind of word it really weirdly on purpose to confuse voters.
Yeah.
Because I
checked out the websites for each of the arguments, and if you didn't know anything and you only went to one of those websites, they are both appealing. They both sound like, oh my gosh, if we say no, if you're against this, then what did we work so hard for to get here?
Right. Yeah.
And at the same time, it's if you say yes to this, it's like, thank you for trying to move America forward. But that's the scary part for a common person who's like trying to do this homework right before elections.
Exactly. Because even like I consider myself pretty informed and, engaged in elections, and even I am struggling with these propositions, and this is just 1 out of 12. So I can't imagine,
Wow.
Yeah.
Because that's the hardest part about the no is like, because on the voter guide website, before it gets to the arguments, they like just simply say what your vote means. And the only thing it says under no is that this wouldn't ban the current consideration of diversity when hiring and whatnot. It's like, okay, but what would it do?
Yeah, that's what's kind of confusing. It's like as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I think I get what they're saying. But then I'm like, wait, how does this actually change anything?
The no side tells you nothing. All it says is like
it just says vote no.
Yeah, it's just like the website is just like, we worked really hard for Proposition 209 and now you want to take it away. Then why did we do all that work? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, who voted on 209? Maybe there
I wasn't even able to vote when
right.
209 was implemented.
Yes. And like that's always another issue too, is like I don't know. It all comes back to what we were saying before. Like, you can tell everybody to vote, but if everybody who's voting doesn't know what they're voting on, this could all go to shit.
Exactly. And it's just going to be a mess. And I feel like a lot of the people that make these propositions get onto the ballot know that.
Yes.
And they kind of take that to their advantage. They know how confusing it sounds. They know people don't want to read through this whole thing. Most people don't. And obviously I can see why. It's confusing and frustrating. And it's so dense. So they kind of, I think they might be banking on people not really reading it, not really educating themselves, and kind of just voting blindly.
Yeah, because that's like why I'm also trying to take my time with the New Jersey questions, because the way that they worded the New Jersey questions sounds like it should be easy answers, because it has to do like representation for victims and basically like a community policing like watchdog, like but they're like, oh, should we have that? Yes or no? But then when you read the explanation for that one in particular, they're like, well, this already exists, but we want to know if this should be like a permanent thing, because if it's not, then it could be eliminated at any minute. And I'm like, wait. I didn't even know that this was a thing. Yeah. Like, we have all the people out in the streets saying like, police the police. Like, wait, but it sounds like somebody is already policing them. So I don't understand. Like, there's just 1,000 things that...
It's so confusing. They just make it so hard for us.
They do. Like, some people are trying and some people are like, meh.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, let's keep it confusing by going to Prop 22.
Oh, God. All right. 22 is a really...
Oh, my. So Prop 22 was put on the ballot actually by petition signatures, which I thought was really interesting. Prop 22 exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. And the summary says, classifies app-based drivers as independent contractors instead of employees, and provides independent contractor drivers other compensation unless certain criteria are met. The fiscal impact says minor increase in state income taxes paid by rideshare and delivery company drivers and investors. But this is another thing where I went to the website for pro and con, and I'm even more confused because I thought that this was all about like, yeah, let's get benefits for independent contractors. But then if you go to the website for yes on Prop 22, they're saying that if you vote yes on this, it would give guaranteed minimum earnings and new healthcare benefits. And then if you go to the one that says vote no, they're saying that, it was like they're buying themselves a special exemption in the law to avoid ever having to pay their fair share to keep drivers safe on the job. It was like one side is saying that, oh yeah, we already get healthcare benefits, and the other side is saying like, we want healthcare benefits. So I'm like, wait, are only some of you aware of what your benefits currently are?
Right. So Prop 22, it's not like a new piece of legislation. It's more about being exempt from this legislation that was already passed by the California Assembly last September, which was making independent contractors as employees in California. So companies like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, with this proposition, they're basically saying we want our drivers to be exempt from this. So Prop 22 would keep our drivers as independent contractors. And a lot of drivers seem to support this prop because they like having the flexibility of kind of choosing their own hours, choosing when they want to work, where they want to drive, things like that. A lot of people do this as kind of a side job to a full-time job they have in something else already. So there's not many full-time drivers. So
it's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's basically saying like, most of the drivers are part-time. They're already earning like $11 to $16 an hour. And the state of California is saying that with Assembly Bill 5, rideshare and delivery companies have to hire drivers as employees. So now the interesting part about that is people that are against Prop 22, so they want to make sure that Uber, Lyft also has to treat their drivers as employees and not contractors. They're saying that Uber and Lyft only want to put this proposition through in order to help their bottom line. So in order to help their profit, because it doesn't really help the drivers. It doesn't increase their benefits or how much they're paid by having this prop implemented. But what it does is it saves the actual companies from having to pay more in wages once their drivers are considered employees. And it prevents the company from having to give full health benefits and workers' compensation. And of course, with COVID, a lot of people are applying for unemployment benefits now. And I believe, Lyft and Uber drivers are not applicable to do that. They're not eligible to do that right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where this line comes in, is like, well, who is it really benefiting? And why does this kind of set a precedent for multi-million companies to kind of buy their way onto the ballot and kind of, pay enough money to say, we want to be exempt from this statewide law. So that's where it gets kind of interesting, because you hear drivers saying, well, I like having it flexible, but then you think about long-term implications of something like this. And it's like, what might a company do down the line if they see that they can kind of just, introduce a new prop to kind of exempt themselves from the law in the state? So it's interesting on both ends. And that's kind of what the people on the no side are saying. And they're kind of just saying like, this really only benefits the company and not the little people, not the drivers, not the people that are actually doing the work. So.
So have you personally figured out which way you're going to vote on either of these propositions? You don't have to say what you're voting, but do you have an idea?
I'm still unsure about 16, but I think I'm going to support 16, but I'm not entirely sure. 22 is just so confusing, because it's like, I want to take into account what actual drivers want, because this impacts them. But then I also am someone who thinks big picture, and I'm thinking about the other side. It's like, well, if these companies are able to kind of buy their way out of having to follow this law, then what kind of precedent does that set down the line? So it's a little confusing. After doing the research, I definitely feel more informed and more like I'm leaning a certain way than I was before. So I'm a little less confused, but it's still a lot to think about.
Now you just have 10 more propositions to
review. Just 10 more to go. It's like a walk in the park. So easy.
Oh my gosh, that is so wild. I'm just glad to know that you're educated, and you're learning what is happening. And hopefully there's more citizens who are voting that are doing the same thing, but it's just a lot to take the time to do it.
Yeah, I really hope so. And like we said earlier, like we have to put emphasis on really like taking the time to educate ourselves on what it is we're voting on, and as much emphasis as we do with the act of voting itself. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Gauri, here's the big question. What does it mean to you to be neighborly?
To be neighborly to me in the year 2020 is to wear a mask. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that is the simplest act of kindness to show your neighbors that you have their best interest at heart. It requires hardly any effort on your part. It benefits you, it benefits your neighbors, it benefits the community, it keeps everyone safe. And it's going to help us hopefully get back to maybe not normal, because I don't think we're ever going to get back to normal, but I think getting back to a new normal, in the sense where we're all healthy and safe. So yeah, just wear a mask. Please wear a mask, everyone.
I like that. That's a simple one that people can do today.
Yeah.
You said you were letter writing recently?
I was. So there's this nonprofit called Vote Forward, and you basically adopt a state, like a swing state for the election, and you write a letter to voters who might be on the line or on the fence about voting. They might be indecisive. You're not telling them who they should vote for, but you're just writing to encourage them to participate, to make their voices heard, to get out and vote. So I've been doing that for voters in Texas and North Carolina. And I highly suggest everyone do the same. You can go to voteforward.org. It's super simple. You just send in an application with just like your name, your email. They verify that you're a human and not a robot. And then they will send you really simple instructions on how to get started.
How long have you been doing that?
I started really recently, just in the last like 3 weeks, I would say.
That's awesome. Do you, when you started, like, because this is handwritten, did you feel like you had bad penmanship or?
I was worried about that, but what's really great is that you don't have to handwrite every single thing. They give you a template, and then they give you space to kind of fill in, like, I'm voting because, and then you can get a little more personal where you can handwrite why you vote in every election, why voting matters to you specifically, so that it has like that personal touch, but you don't have to, you don't have to get super creative or be like, how should I address this letter? Like they lay it out for you like really nicely with a template. So
yeah, that's nice. It seems unintimidating.
Yeah, it's really unintimidating. It's really super easy. You just have to have stamps and envelopes, and they take care of the rest.
Oh, wow. Well, citizens, share what you think it means to be a citizen and a neighbor in your area by emailing me at thisjess@gmail.com, and I want to share them on the podcast, so send them in. That's thisjes@gmail.com. Please share this podcast with your friends all over the country so they can learn about the positions, some history lessons, as well as current happenings, and maybe even be inspired to start their own informative podcast. Gauri, did you want to talk about anything else before we close it out?
I just want to remind everyone to please vote, and please read up about what you're going to be voting on. Don't sit this election out. Vote up and down the ballot. Get to know your neighbors in a socially distant way. Get to know what it's going to be, what the issues are going to be in your community, and just get out there and do the thing. Just do it.
Do the thing. Like I said to Sarah last time, she made me realize, like, when voting's over, I want to catch up with you and see what the results were, how you feel about them. And I mean, I think that the easiest way for us to no longer have to play catch up is to be informed constantly.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to say that every episode of my podcast is going to focus on politics, but I think it's definitely going to be a recurring topic. So I look forward to having you on in the future.
I would love that.
Well, this has been your host and your friend, Jess. Gauri, thank you so much for sharing your California ballot with us. Will you lead us out?
I'll see you around the neighborhood.